Hey, welcome back. I'm going to first answer a couple of questions that came in to me through email. Apparently I was a little confusing in my last video about indirect and direct evidence. What I want you to think about is direct evidence is a way we say it's pretty strong in court. We've got video, we've got multiple eyewitness testimony. It's so strong that we really don't have to draw an inference, and usually people don't go to trial when we have direct evidence. They usually take a plea or they plead guilty. I get it, there's a lot of different things that can make a video not really seem what it is, but right now just understand direct evidence is very strong. Eyewitness testimony, generally it's video coming in, as opposed to indirect. Indirect is a fancy way of saying circumstantial. Same thing. Circumstantial, indirect evidence is we're trying to draw a link between this evidence and the person that we think committed the crime. We're hoping that you agree with us based on a probability. I get it. We don't have a crystal ball. But your fingerprints were on the gun. Somebody's dead. The gun was used in that crime. Why are your fingerprints on there? That's circumstantial. Everything we do is circumstantial. All the TV shows you watch are circumstantial. So again, when we talk about today, we're going to focus on fingerprint analysis. And remember, you should have in your last assignments, everybody understands APHIS, fingerprint analysis, and I try and bring into my class the controversies, the conspiracy theorists. Let's talk about fingerprint analysis as a forensic science. Is it legitimate? Is it accurate? Absolutely. There's no scientist out there that's going to say that it's not an accurate science. Do we have issues and problems with it when we go to court? Absolutely. And we'll talk about them. First issue is this. As an academic, because I'm a cop and an academic, I realize this is where we lack some of the most academic research. We can't go to court and show how many times were we wrong. You know, how many times do we compare fingerprints from suspect to this, and how many times do we have an error rate? Meaning, and we don't do a lot of research on this to show in court that this is how strong it is. So the problem with fingerprint analysis is more about we need to do more research to show how good it actually is. Because it is good. Fingerprints and your fingerprints start to form inside the womb. It starts to form, they're so unique to you, even identical twins. We all have different fingerprint analysis. Our fingerprints are all unique. The second problem with this analysis is that when we talk about identifying a match between this print and what was on the gun, we know that in order to be accurate at this, we have to look for 12 different identifying specific traits. If a police department only has a partial print and they can only find 2 or 3 things that look like this person, if you move away from 12 points, you're probably not going to be very accurate. So that's our fault, your fault. If you hit 12 points, you're going to be very, very accurate. So it is a very specific science that works, but we have to do our job correctly when we get to court. And I would never want to take a case to court with just fingerprints. When we start getting to circumstantial evidence, whatever it is, I don't like to see a case that is all about one specific thing. If all you've got is a fingerprint, pretty weak case. I want to see a lot of circumstantial evidence so that the totality of everything shows, yeah, pretty good idea this person did it. If you've just got one, we know based on all of the people that we put into prison wrong, which we have. The number one reason we do this is based on direct testimony or eyewitness testimony. Unfortunately, victims just don't do a good job identifying the suspect. So remember, I hope you have a totality, lots of evidence when you do things. So let's talk about fingerprints. There are 3 types of fingerprints. 3 types. We're going to talk about types and classes. The first type is latent, L-A-T-E-N-T. Latent are basically prints that you leave behind the scene. You leave them behind the scene based on your bodily fluids. You're sweating, the oils, the sweat. Think about crimes are happening. You're sweating. So when you leave behind your sweaty shit, whatever you have, it's invisible to the eye, whether I'm touching this screen or not. In most cases, it's invisible. We have to go capture it later. Latent is leaving behind your sweat, your fluids. The next type we talk about is patent. Patent, P-A-T-E-N-T, patent's different. You're still leaving behind a print, but it's secondarily, it's not your fluid. Say you put your hand in grease, you're a mechanic, you had grease all over your hands. You pick up a wrench, you kill somebody, and you touch something. If you leave your print and it's grease left behind, not your fluids, we call this patent. Or blood. Blood's another one. You got blood on your hands. The blood is left behind, leaving your print, we call that a patent. The third one that we talk about is called plastic. A plastic print you don't see a lot. The way you think of a plastic print is an impression left behind. Think about putting your hand on ice, and it's actually in that ice, or snow, or clay. So you're leaving behind your print. You're not leaving any kind of oils or residue of grease, but you're actually leaving an imprint. Don't see this a lot, but that's the third type of print. The classes. When we talk about classes, so when you go to court, you have to first testify to, what type of print is it that you're taking, but then we have to show what class. When we talk about classes of prints, they're individual characteristics of you. And so when I have you in class, I try and give you, I have you do a fingerprint, and I try and get you to identify what type of class each of you are. At this point, I'm going to try and explain it to you. Arches. I'm going to show you up here. So there's three classes. The first one that we're going to talk about is a plain arch. I'm going to show you a video of a plain arch. Again, it's going to be in your book, but take a look at the arch. They're the least common fingerprint out there. About 5% of the world's population have arches. So if you have arches, you probably don't want to commit crimes. We can catch you. There's not many arches out there. You can go in the book and you kind of look at it, but the way to identify arches, the easiest way to explain is, when you come back and look at this, is an arch is these lines. It's almost like a maze. Rather than a maze, you have a line that comes on one side of your finger and goes off the other. So when lines come from one side and go off the other, that's an arch. 5% of the population have arches. That's the first class. The second class is what we call loops. The loops are the most common. About 65% of the population on the planet have loops. And loops are when the lines come in, and you can see clearly they make a loop in here. And they usually go off the page or off your finger the same side as it came on. So loops are 65% of the population. The last one is called whorls. And whorls are about 30 to 35%. We'll give you a picture of the whorls. So these are the three types of classes. So when we go to court, we have to first explain, how did we get the print? Was it latent? Was it patent? And then we have to decide, this was the class. The individual that we're trying to match this to had this particular class. So this gives you kind of a rough idea of what we're looking at. But I know what most of you wanted to know is, how do we gather this information? How do we get it from a crime scene? Remember, these are invisible. Most of what we deal with is latent prints. Latent prints are left behind your body, your bodily fluids. And it's really just messy work. When we try and gather that print, as you can see, we're going to be using all kinds of carbon powders. We're going to be using all kinds of magnetic powders. And it's really just being a scientist and understanding, what kind of surface do I have? Where do I expect the bad guy to have touched, leaving behind a print? And because it's on that surface, what kind of powder works the best? So when we talk about what you see on TV the most of the time, we talk about the plain carbon powder. To show you how to do this just really quickly, remember, if somebody was to come into this room here and commit a crime, we would expect, if witnesses said when they came in, they fell down, they crawled back up the wall. As they crawled back up the wall, we would expect there's going to be prints. We can't see them. So when a CSI person comes in and they're looking for a print, remember, we don't know. We're looking. The way you look for it, and it's very messy, believe me, you put a lot of powder on your brush. You're not really touching the surface. You're backing off about 1/16 of an inch, and you're swirling the brush. And you're trying to go up and down this wall, and you can see as you come in here, that as I'm going through here, I'm trying to find where I can see a print. When I get to a location where I see a print, then I'll start focusing on that location. Certain surfaces, you can see like right here, drywall, has bumpy ridges, might need a different type of powder. But this is what we're doing. We're going through methodically looking for where they touched. Once we get there, you can see I'm on metal now. As you can see around the doorway now, I'm starting to get a lot of prints coming up. You can see prints coming up. And at this point, I'm going to try and do it. But I'm going to show you really quickly, because it's easiest to do on glass. If I'm looking for a print on glass, and I'm going to put this behind here so you can see it a little bit better. I'm going to be twirling that powder until I get a print. And as you can see where I had somebody touch this earlier, you can see the print starts to come up that way, okay? There's times that you're going to have things like paper. Paper is a difficult thing to get prints off, so we know we use magnetic carbon. So if you come in here, you'll see magnetic carbon actually sticks. It's magnetic. It's got a lot of iron in it. So what we do here a little bit differently is it's like a paintbrush. When we go up and down, and you can see the print materialize as I use magnetic powder. And look how good that came up on previously something you didn't know. If I take the same thing, and again, doing this, if you're a CSI person, you know what kind of surfaces work the best with what kind of powders. Do you get the idea? It's fun, it's extremely messy, and it's just one type of circumstantial evidence that we collect from a scene. Many, many crimes have been solved based on picking up prints from locations that suspects said that they never were at. If this is something you want to mess with, come in here. I've got all kinds of powders. I've got all different kinds of things you can have fun with. I've got all kinds of books if you want to dig deeper on the specifics. But at this point, just understand this is how we gather fingerprints from a crime scene. We'll see you next time.